I'm Alex Knizek, and this is a review of the 2026 Toyota RAV4 Plug-In Hybrid. The RAV4 is the most popular small car-based SUV, so when it gets redesigned for 2026, we better pay close attention. Now, this is undoubtedly the hottest segment in the automotive industry, and basically every single brand makes a competitive vehicle. And today we're looking at the plug-in hybrid version of the RAV4 specifically, which is a bit unique in the segment. So real quick, what is a plug-in hybrid? It's basically a regular hybrid, except it has a larger battery and you can plug it in. And when you do that, you'll get somewhere between 30 and 50 miles of all-electric driving, depending on the model, and then it'll switch over to regular hybrid operation. And what I mean by that is the gas engine will come on and supplement the electric power that's left, and you'll just drive it like normal. But with a plug-in hybrid, it is very important that you do plug it in, because that's how you're gonna get the most efficient operation of the vehicle and essentially get your money's worth for buying one of these. And we have a whole other video that's linked right here below me that explains all the differences between these types of powertrains, so go check that out. And in case you're unfamiliar, we buy all of the cars that we test here at Consumer Reports. We buy them anonymously. We make sure that we get a representative version that isn't specially prepped by the manufacturer, so it's truly a version that you would go out and buy yourself. So with that, here's what we bought. We bought a 2026 Toyota RAV4 XSE plug-in hybrid, and we got a bunch of options: the weather package, sunroof, JBL stereo, the driver assist package, and a couple of other things, which totaled $3,914. The destination cost is $1,595, and the total cost came to $52,709. And unlike the regular hybrid that's built in the US, the plug-in hybrid is built in Japan. Yeah, you heard that right. We paid almost $53,000 for a RAV4, which is crazy. I mean, you can get a regular non-plug-in hybrid version starting around $30,000, at least at the time of this filming. So if you're gonna go with the plug-in hybrid version, plug it in, take advantage of that powertrain that you purchased, because that's how you're gonna pay off that extra money that you spent on this version. So starting with the outside, what has Toyota done here? First of all, the styling, right? So it looks more modern. They've done this kind of basket weave grille. I was told it looks kind of like a laundry basket, which I don't disagree with, but I think it looks good. The version that we got is this black on black on black version, so totally blacked out if that's your thing. As you work your way towards the back, personally, I think it looks like a Nissan Rogue, which, no hate on the Nissan Rogue, I think it just looks a little derivative. But I think the most important thing here to know is that Toyota kept the structure, the bones, the architecture of the vehicle largely the same. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but it means that it hasn't grown in size at all. And that's a little atypical for cars in general, and certainly this segment. Typically we see with redesigns, new models, they get a little larger, you get more cargo space. The flip side to that is by using things that are proven and technologies and components that are already tried and true, tends to bode well for reliability. While Toyota didn't make a ton of structural changes to the RAV4, they did do a lot of work under the skin, and that means an updated plug-in hybrid powertrain. So this now has even more power than it did before. Now it has 324 horsepower, which is more than a GR Corolla for some reason. All plug-in hybrid models are all-wheel drive. And I think a big thing here is that they increased the battery pack size. So it's now 23 kilowatt hours. And what that means is that assuming you're charging it regularly, you're going to get about 52 miles of all-electric driving according to Toyota. In terms of efficiency, the EPA rates this at a combined MPG in hybrid mode, so without a battery charge, at 40 miles per gallon. And that's kind of crazy because the regular hybrid version is rated for 41 miles per gallon, which, yeah, it's a little bit better, but we typically see a bigger differential between a regular hybrid and its plug-in hybrid version when the battery is not charged. All of this to say that somehow Toyota has managed to make it more powerful, give you more electric driving range by making the battery larger, which means it's heavier than the last plug-in hybrid version that we tested, and it got more efficient. Not sure how they managed all of that, but it's pretty impressive. So in terms of charging, here's everything you need to know. The port is right here on the driver's side front fender, which is a great spot. You're gonna see that it's plugged in when you go to get into the car. When you open this up, you may notice that for a plug-in hybrid, this is a little bit weird. There's a little flap here, and you can actually DC fast charge this version, the XSE. It'll do up to 50 kilowatts, so it'll charge it pretty quickly, about 10 to 80% in 30 minutes. But honestly, it's a little pointless because one of the purposes of buying a plug-in hybrid as opposed to a regular EV is that on a long road trip, you don't have to worry about finding a DC fast charger or public charging. You can rely on the engine that you also have. But what most people will be doing is using the regular level 2 charger here, at home charging, and with an 11 kilowatt onboard charger, it'll do it in about 4 hours, which is great. It is on the larger side in terms of the battery size for a plug-in hybrid, so if you want to get away with a regular 120 volt charger, it will take a bit longer and definitely overnight to fully charge it up. Before we get in, and likely before you get in, you may want to put some stuff in the back. So we're going to check out the cargo area. The button for it is right where you'd expect, so nice and easy. Despite the car not getting any larger, the cargo space is still competitive, and you have a nice wide opening, so that's great. The seats do fold flat, but there's no lever on the side like you have in some models, so you will either be reaching in or walking around to fold the seats flat. We're gonna check to see if it's got a spare tire, which I genuinely do not know. But before that, just real quickly, there is this little lip here where it folds or like slopes down at the edge. When you open your hatch, if anything's fallen out or whatever, you might lose some stuff out the back because of this slope. So just be mindful of that. Here we go. Yes, nice. A temporary spare tire, which is actually kind of unexpected with a plug-in hybrid because sometimes this space gets filled with the battery or something like that. So you're really not missing out on anything, at least in this regard, with going with the plug-in hybrid. And I'd much rather have this temporary spare over a inflator kit. So getting in, it's typical for the class. I mean, it's the reason why people love SUVs this size is the seat is just at hip height. It's easy to get in, regular door handles, which is awesome. But the thing to note with the RAV4 specifically is that the doors do not open that wide. So the front, okay, but the rear in particular, a lot of cars in this segment now are really going for the 90-degree opening. Makes it easier to put a child seat in there or a person. Toyota, honestly, they kind of phoned it in. This doesn't open anywhere near that, and you really do notice when you're getting in and out of this thing that just doesn't swing as wide as you might expect. We're in the RAV4 now, and in terms of the driving position, this is actually one of the clearest demerits for this car and a deal breaker, honestly, for a number of us here at CR. So it's not that it's not spacious enough in terms of headroom or the adjustments aren't there. It honestly comes down to the width and design of this center console and where my knee lands against this really, really hard surface, which even on this $53,000 version is not padded. And then for me personally, these armrests are just such a letdown. For some reason, the dashboard has more padding than this armrest. And just when you push your elbow onto it while you're driving, it just is a pressure point, super uncomfortable. And then you go over onto this center console here, and yeah, it's got a little bit more give to it, but it's just pretty hard. So between the two things, the armrests and this knee position in the center console, it's just not really that well set up for long-term comfort. But again, beyond that, the seat, power adjustable, that's all well and good. I have enough adjustment from the steering wheel, which has been an issue with some Toyotas in the past where they don't telescope enough. And then I do have plenty of headroom despite the car not getting any larger. So make these more comfortable, put a little padding here, and we'd be golden. When it comes to the seat itself, we're pretty neutral on them overall. Of course, you'll have to see if it works for you, but the good thing is that they are a bit wider, so they're going to accommodate, different types of people. The flip side to that is they're a little short on the bolstering. So as you're driving, you might notice that you're moving around in the seat, you're not having enough support basically side to side. However, the plug-in hybrid version does get this different material compared to the regular hybrid, kind of grippy, suede-like material, and that does actually not only look nice and feel nice, it holds you in the seat a little better too. Then when it comes to the rear seat, if you've been in a RAV4 in the last, 5 years, it's basically the same. It's a little low. Like we mentioned before, the biggest thing with the rear seat is actually the access and the fact that the door doesn't open all that wide. Storage-wise, the RAV4 is actually pretty good. Starting with the center console, yeah, I was complaining about how wide and uncomfortable it is, but it actually is good for storage because you have this tiered setup here where you have this lower bin here, which actually goes pretty deep. I've got some sunglasses, keys, whatever in there. That's great. And then you have your wireless charger and another kind of slot, if you will, for a phone up here. So this tiered setup, it actually works quite well in practice. The plug-in hybrid gets this smaller shifter compared to the regular shifter in the hybrid version, and that just means accessing this space is a little bit easier. 2 cup holders, so you can take this little divider thing out if you want. Up on top of the dash, you do get this, like, again, kind of tiered storage system that works pretty well. And this is fairly deep. You could put your phone up there or some other small items for the passenger so they're not completely neglected over there. And then decent cup holders in the door. What I like about those is that the height is not really limited. Some cars, you can't really put a taller water bottle in there. And here, that's not the case, just with the way the door is designed. So that's cool. Probably the most unique thing is this center console that does basically a kickflip. First of all, it opens both ways, so cool. But then if you press both buttons at once, the whole thing comes off. It's always kind of weird to me when pieces of a car just are removable like that, but take it out, flip it over, and then you're left with a tray. They say don't put any drinks or chicken nuggets on it. So I don't really know what you would use this for, but first of all, it's a little janky. We'll get into fit and finish, but it's kind of satisfying because you don't have to be that precise when you put this back on. You can kind of just drop it on there and press it down. So easy enough to use, but yeah, the whole thing kind of rattles and moves around and it doesn't feel the most premium, I guess, when you use it. Fit and finish on the inside of this car is a place where, honestly, compared to the competition, the new ones, not really doing so great either. It's not bad, but it definitely feels very truck-like, a bit more industrial, if you will. Just a lot of hard plastics. Probably the nicest thing about it is the seats that you get on the plug-in hybrid version with the suede and all that. But otherwise, for $53,000, you're basically getting the same interior that you're getting in the $35,000 version of this car. Hopefully, at the very least, it's durable and it holds up over time. Toyota also made a lot of upgrades to the tech in this car, or, the controls, the displays, and overall, there's still a lot of physical controls here, which is great. They haven't gone full touchscreen or anything like that, which is not a given in today's automotive market. So it is nice to see traditional stocks for the wipers and the lights, good physical controls on the steering wheel that are fairly easy to use, volume knob. Awesome. Where they start to go south a little bit is the climate controls. They used to have big knobs for temperature and fan speed and all that stuff, but they've really just succumbed to the trend of let's put all the climate in the touchscreen. There are still some buttons down here to do your defrosters and your temperature. So those are okay. I mean, they're a little small, and honestly, having to tap these buttons, maybe not as easy, but other than that, the rest of the climate is in the touchscreen. You have to go in here and do fan speed, your sync, and some of the other controls, you got to go into here and do that. So, but the vents are still manual. Again, sounds silly, but some of these cars these days are having these electronically controlled vents. But beyond that, they've updated the software, the infotainment, if you will. So that's the digital display behind the driver here and the center display here. And they've actually made some really good improvements. The last version suffered in the sense that it did not have a home screen. So this screen that we're looking at right now is new. And basically what that means is you have these widgets where you can look at multiple pieces of information at the same time. So for example, what's playing on the audio system and the map at the same time. Kind of sounds obvious, but the previous version, you could only look at one or the other. So you were always jumping around between these different menus. And when you look at the driver's display, it's honestly still a bit cluttered. You'll look at it right now, I'm sure, and there's information kind of everywhere. It's a little easier to navigate the menus. Still, I would suggest sitting down with it and understanding what the different, presets are and cycling between the different views and whatnot, but they're at least making progress in cleaning this up. Now, if the driving position we talked about is one deal breaker, the inconsistency of the phone connection is the other deal breaker. Every time you get in this car, you don't know whether your phone's going to pair or not. And I'm not talking setting up for the first time. I'm talking you're getting back in the car and you just want CarPlay to start up, like in any car. It's kind of table stakes at this point. It doesn't always connect. It seems, at least in my experience, more often than not, it doesn't reconnect. And you have to go into the screen and redo things. And even at $30,000, that seems inexcusable. But we're talking about a $53,000 RAV4. My phone should just connect to it when you get in the car. The shifter, if you're coming out of an older RAV4, is going to look a little weird. It's what we call a monostable, but honestly, it's pretty easy to use. When you shift gears, you just move this little lever back and forth, and it just returns to the center point. It's clearly labeled. Yeah, it's a little different than that lever style shifter you may be used to, but as I mentioned earlier, it does clean up this space and it gives you better access to the storage that's in front of it. And you'll notice that when I put the car in reverse, I do get a pretty large 360 camera view up here on the center screen, which is something different that this plug-in hybrid version gets compared to the regular hybrid that we tested. So this is a really nice feature. And actually the screen size is larger in this plug-in hybrid version too. It's not that we felt that the smaller screen size was a detriment or that it needed to be larger, but at least when it comes to this camera view, having that extra real estate is kind of nice. All right, so we are driving the 2026 RAV4 plug-in hybrid. Powertrain-wise, honestly, way faster and more powerful than it kind of deserves to be, and in some ways than the chassis itself can handle. But that being said, it's kind of fun, the fact that you have that 320 plus horsepower and a bunch of torque. And because a plug-in hybrid like this has larger electric motors than even a regular hybrid, the electric torque, kind of that instantaneous torque that you feel off the line is there. It's plentiful, so it feels powerful, feels immediate to respond. Basically, what this powertrain is Toyota's already great hybrid system with more power and more battery. It's called a power split device, but really you can think of it as it behaves more like a CVT transmission. So you don't have gear changes or anything like that. So it's quite seamless in the power delivery. You just get the power you want when you want it. So whether you're in EV mode or hybrid mode or whatever, it's going to be seamless and drive pretty similarly depending on with and without a charge, which is good. And so right now we're driving along in EV mode and showing me about 48 miles of all electric range available. And one thing that we don't really love about Toyota's setup, and they've done it before and they're doing it again here, is that when you do charge it, as you should, it's going to default to electric mode when you get into the car. The reason we don't really like that is because the electric mode is only giving you some of the power, right? That 324 horsepower that I mentioned comes from the motor plus the gasoline engine together make that power. So when you're in EV mode, you don't have it all. Luckily, this car does have a decent amount of power from the electric motors only, so in most situations, it's fine. You can merge, you can drive normally, and it's totally cool. But there are times where you want to merge into quicker moving traffic, making that left-hand turn or whatever it might be, where you really do need more power than EV mode can provide, and it won't turn the gas engine on automatically. A lot of plug-in hybrids, when you do that, it'll just blend in the gas engine kind of automatically. But in this car, you're going to have to go down to these drive mode switches and deliberately put it into auto or hybrid mode, essentially. And then on top of that, you have HV mode, stands for hybrid vehicle. Really what that's doing is holding the battery charge where it is. So if you put it in hybrid mode, let's say you had a 50% charge on the battery, it's going to just hold it there. Essentially, you can use it later. What they did get rid of from the last plug-in hybrid that I actually like is the charge mode. So there was this mode, and a lot of plug-in hybrids have this, where you can force the engine to essentially run overtime to charge the battery while you're driving. And on the surface, that sounds pretty cool, but you're going to wreck your efficiency by doing that, because now the engine's just running way more than it needs to charge up the battery. You're converting one energy type to another, and that costs you energy, right? Nothing's perfectly efficient. So you're really wasting fuel by doing that. So they actually just removed that function. And honestly, it simplifies the interface. And I think it just, for a relatively confusing technology, just makes it easier to approach. So all good there. On top of that, you have all your regular drive modes too. So you have normal and sport and all this stuff. So it can get a little overwhelming. So honestly, the easiest thing to do is just leave the drive mode in normal, which we know most people do anyway, and then just either use the EV mode or put it in that auto mode if you want to make sure that you have that full charge available, and kind of ignore the rest. From a noise perspective, this new RAV4, like the regular hybrid, is pretty competitive when it comes to road noise and wind noise. You know, nothing outstanding, but good, in line with what you would expect for the class. Toyota tends to not do so well when it comes to engine noise, and in some ways that is true here. The 2.5 liter engine that they have is largely the same as other vehicles that are using this engine, and it doesn't sound the best. Flip side, though, is that with the plug-in hybrid, because you have so much electric power, you're not revving the engine as often, so you may not hear it as much, which is good, because when you do hear it, it's not so great. In terms of dynamics, driving, ride, handling, that sort of thing, Toyota has prioritized ride comfort here, which is actually I really appreciate that. A lot of cars now try to be sporty. They try to also be comfortable, and then it ends up not being so great at either of those things. And even though this plug-in hybrid has 20-inch wheels on it, it really does ride well. It absorbs bumps well, and the body is well controlled, so you don't feel like it's floating around too much or anything like that. So it is a genuinely comfortable riding car, which I think it's all the better for that. Now, of course, it doesn't have tricks up its sleeve like some more expensive vehicles, so the handling does suffer a little bit, but it's still pretty easy to drive, especially in routine, everyday type situations. The steering is quick enough, the effort's pretty light. Where it starts to, not feel so great is if you do drive it a little more quickly or, spiritedly, we'll say. You can tell that the body rolls a bit quicker than you may want, and it just starts to feel almost sloppy a little bit. And that extra weight that this plug-in hybrid has versus the regular hybrid, you do start to notice it when you drive more quickly. But again, day to day, it's not really going to be an issue. Visibility wise, the pillars, they do come a little close to my head in terms of like the way they're angled, right? They're going for aerodynamics, so they're laid back a little bit, but they're relatively slim. And then what we love to see is they went through the effort to mount the side view mirrors on the door instead of up on the pillar. So that gives you this gap in between the pillar and the mirror. So rather than one big blind spot in that area, you can visually see right through it, which is just good when you're at intersections and things like that. You're not gonna, or you're less likely, we'll say, to miss, somebody as they get hidden behind that pillar. Then as you go to the sides, the windows, they could be larger. There are some SUVs that it's a little easier to see out of, but by and large, it's pretty good. And they've got a rear quarter window back there that is basically behind the door and before the rear of the car. That's genuinely usable, and that's great. So it's pretty conventional in that way, which just makes it easy to use and basically see out of the car. So the RAV4 hybrid and plug-in hybrid by extension are debuting Toyota's newest safety system. So they call it Toyota Safety Sense 4.0. The last one was actually on 2.5, so better than the last one. And it is genuinely true. We are seeing that the lane centering, or LCA, that you get, so this is a system that'll continuously add steering support to keep you centered in the lane. It's better. It allows the driver to collaborate more, which means that when you're putting in your own steering effort, you're not feeling the system fighting you or tugging you or, feeling weird through the steering. So they're just doing a better job of tuning these systems. And then it basically comes with all of the safety systems that we like to see standard, including blind spot warning, rear cross traffic warning, things like that. So that's great. Where this new system is not so great, and we've seen it with Toyotas in the past too, and is the driver monitoring systems. And that's because every time I look away, basically from directly forward, it starts a countdown. And it's a super short countdown before it starts beeping at me because it thinks I'm not paying attention. In some cases, that may be true, right? If I'm messing around with the screen, then yeah, okay, that's not great. But where we're seeing it be overly sensitive is when checking side mirrors, or I had an instance where I was just simply driving down my street about to pull into my driveway, and I naturally turn and look towards my driveway to plan my turn, right? And it starts beeping at me because it thinks I'm not paying attention. And frankly, that's kind of ridiculous and counterproductive too, because not only am I now more distracted in that situation and annoyed, but if it's too sensitive, too annoying, I'm more inclined to go in and turn that system off, which means I'm not taking advantage of it ever, right? And the reason we encourage these systems to be here in the first place, regardless of how they're tuned, is because we want to see that when the car has what's called an L2 system, or the combination of adaptive cruise control and lane centering, when those two systems are on, there should be a driver monitoring camera that's making sure that I'm paying attention and I'm not being distracted by something else while the car is effectively providing a lot of driving support on its own. So that's why they're there, but Toyota needs to work on the tuning of it so that it's more in the background. So naturally, one difference here compared to the regular hybrid is that it's got to show you some additional pieces of information, like how much electric range you have versus how much gas or hybrid range you have, right? And it does that. So here it's showing me 45 miles of electric only range. And then on the other side of the gauge display is showing me 341 miles of gas or hybrid range, right? Usually a plug-in hybrid will show you both of these things together, and they're not doing that here, which is a little confusing, but I can go into the center screen and find that information. But what is a little weird about that is, even though the battery is essentially fully charged, this little gauge here in the center is showing me half charged, implying that I could get almost 100 miles of range, which, I don't know, almost seems like a bug or something because it's not properly displayed. What I do like, though, is that Toyota does show you from an efficiency standpoint, when you're driving around in electric only mode and the engine's completely off, it's showing you the efficiency in terms of miles per kilowatt hour, just like an EV would. But then the second the engine comes on and it switches to hybrid mode, you're using gas, it just shows you miles per gallon, like you might expect. So no weird MPGE or some difficult to understand unit, just one or the other when you need it, which I think is awesome. So the RAV4 essentially invented the compact SUV class, and the plug-in hybrid, when it came out for the last generation, was unexpectedly quick and powerful and pretty unique. And if you liked the last one, you're likely to enjoy this one too, because it's really just refining the formula. It's a little more comfortable, new tech, new styling. However, there are some things that I think are going to be pretty annoying on a long-term ownership basis that may be a deal breaker. First, you have these park bench inspired armrests that are just super uncomfortable in a tight driving position around the knees. And then it should not be a gamble every time you get into this car whether your phone is going to connect or not. So those are the things that could be deal breakers and could just be tiring for you on a day-to-day basis. However, if those don't bother you, you are most likely to be a happy RAV4 customer, especially if you're coming out of the last one. For more on plug-in hybrids and compact SUVs, head to cr.org.